Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are so grateful that you're here with us. This is the COE webinar on integrating mental wellness and trauma-sensitive practices into adult ESOL. Uh, I'll introduce myself, then I'll ask my colleague to introduce herself. So my name's Xavier Muñoz. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at the English Empowerment Center. Our mission is to teach adults the basic skills of reading, writing, speaking, and understanding English so they can access employment and educational opportunities and more fully and equitably participate in the community. We're a nonprofit. We're a community-based literacy organization in Northern Virginia. We have in-person classes and online classes. I personally actually reside in the Chicago area, so shout out to all the Illinois folks, as well as the Texas and other folks who I see introducing themselves in the chat. Um, One more thing about our organization, we serve over 2,000 adult English learners a year, with a particular focus on those at the beginning levels of English proficiency. And we do that through beginning English classes, family literacy, small group tutoring, conversation classes, writing classes, and through our Destination Workforce program, we offer workforce readiness classes for the general public, for TANF recipients, employer-sponsored workplace literacy classes, as well as customer service IETs. And we used to get IELCE funding. But I'll pass it to Melissa to introduce herself.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to have you all here. Thank you for posting your names and where you're from in the chat. Please continue to do that. My name is Melissa Ray. I am the Faculty Support Manager at the English Empowerment Center. I have been in adult education since 1993, and I've worked in shelters, recovery programs, reintroduction programs, reentry programs, detention facilities, and adult education programs in county schools. So I have worked with clients and students who have mental health issues and or trauma experiences. And it's nice to be here today. Thank you.
So as you introduce yourself in the chat, we'd love to know a little bit about what your program does or maybe doesn't yet do. So please in the chat, if you can post A, B, and or C or other to let us know if your program A addresses mental health or trauma through its program design in one way or another. B, conducts screenings or actually offers mental health services, and or C, that your program knows or has existing partnerships with providers who do offer mental health services. And seeing a lot of C's, a lot of folks who know of partners in your area that provide these services. Some folks saying A, that they do address mental health or trauma in their program design. And just a few B's where your program offers those direct services yourself. Great. So this session, you'll have this recording through COABE. We're also going to look at some of the lesson plans that we developed to help address the topic of mental health in beginning level adult English language classes. Uh, we also have a handout that includes links to those as well as some of the curated other resources, both informational as well as instructional, that you can access. I'll put those links here in the chat, but then as we go through today, uh, we'll point you to the specific things and we want to investigate them and explore them together as a group. But know that the resources are available here during this live session and then through the recording from COABE.
So most of us know somebody who's touched by mental health issues and or trauma. It could be an acquaintance, a family member, a coworker, a loved one, or even yourself. And the chances certainly are that many of our English language learners deal with these issues as well. So we want to think about mental health and trauma as something that is not us and them, it's all of us, right? So this slide, I know, next slide, Xavier. This slide is a little startling, I know. It says 1 out of every 2 people in the world will develop a mental health disorder in their lifetime. This was a 150,000 face-to-face survey done across 29 countries. It was the University of Queensland and Harvard Medical School, and they came out with these surveys of all those individuals and found that this was the projection. And of course, we could argue that there are other, numbers that in terms of the rates of mental health and in the community or in the population. But the point again here is that we want to think about mental health as something that affects everyone. If it's not you, it's someone you know, it's a student, it's a friend, it's a loved one, it's a family member. Okay. Okay, so to start with a baseline, let's talk about what mental health is. This is a definition from the World Health Organization. Mental health is a state of mental well-being that enables people to cope with the stresses of life, realize their abilities, learn well and work well, and contribute to their community. It has intrinsic and instrumental value and is integral to our well-being. Okay. So we're going to do a Mentimeter here. Xavier is going to post in the chat a link to a Mentimeter. He just posted it with a code. You'll see the code in there as well. And I'd like you to answer this question when you access the Mentimeter. And the question is, what are some stressors adult learners face? In your experience, what are some of these stressors? Finances, language barriers, childcare, financial instability, transportation, housing, money, shame, finances. ICE is a big one right now, obviously, with everything that's going on. Yes. Houselessness, yep. Uncertainty, financial insecurity. Great. Yeah, all of these things, as professionals in this field, we know that these are very common stressors for our students, okay? All right. Next slide. So let's talk about trauma then, specifically for a moment, right? What is trauma? Let's use this as a baseline. Trauma results from an event, series of events, or set of circumstances that is experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful or threatening, and that has lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning and physical, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Okay, and that is from SAMHSA. Okay, so that is our baseline. And next, we're going to look at what are considered layers of trauma. This was done with Safe Harbor down in Henrico, Virginia, came up with this visual. And it's really illustrating the layers that can happen to individuals who are immigrants to any country, but for our country in particular, we're talking about things like violence and trauma in their home country, right? And then during migration, there can be many things that happen to individuals during a very arduous, in some cases, journey to get to the United States. And then there can be post-migration stressors as well. Okay. And so all of these things, this visual really is just to show you that these things can layer on each other and create what we consider like a cumulative trauma. Okay. So, what are some trauma reactions that you have seen? Let's go ahead and post in the chat. What are some trauma reactions you've seen in your experience working with adult English language learners or adult learners? Disengagement, shutting down, anger, yes. They shut down, they zone out. They might have tears or cry, have emotional outbursts. Negative self-talk, exactly. Difficulties learning, absolutely. Reactivity, avoidance to certain things, acting out, poor attendance, absolutely, yes. Keep them coming. Fear, lack of participation, so many things, yes. So we all have this experience. We're all in this field and we all have seen these things firsthand, right? So this next slide are some of these trauma reactions that we've already talked about. I won't name these all. We already listed most of these. Um, so this is just a sort of general list that you can have to reference, but all of these things that you're writing in the chat are absolutely true. Okay, so effects of trauma on the brain and the body. We know that trauma affects the brain and the body, right? So the initial response to trauma is automatic. When the nervous system is activated, cognitive brain functions stop, right? This is some of this disengagement that we see in the classroom. When students are having an activated nervous system, cognitive functions stop and they're unable to learn. Trauma impacts memory involving the brain cortex, amygdala, and hippocampus. Okay, trauma does not disperse or disappear over time without treatment. For the most part, instead of fading, trauma can continue to be re-triggered. Okay. So now let's talk about some of the effects of trauma on learning. Let's post in the chat again. What do you see in your students, in your learners, that are some of the effects of trauma on the learning? Disengaged, lack of motivation, memory issues, fear and insecurity, forgetfulness, absolutely, low self-esteem, health issues, right? So many great things coming in here. Learning stop when trauma occurs. Yes, that is very true. That can happen. Not understanding, anxiety, leaving the room, many of these. Yes, good. Okay. So this list that we popped up is just some of the things that you mentioned in the chat. And next slide. Okay, but there is good news, right? There are interventions that can and do help those who are traumatized to learn and flourish, right? This is possible. There are things that we can do, and this is from the Council for Adult and Experiential Learning. Okay, next slide is a Mentimeter. How do you create a supportive classroom that feels safe? Given the fact that these things can happen and appear in our students in the classroom environment, what are some things you've done to create this supportive classroom? And the Mentimeter link again is in the chat with the code. So some of the things, consistency, routines, absolutely. Routines and consistency. Listen, show kindness, tell your own story, share your story. Okay, routines again. Give support, breathing exercises. That's a great one. We can engage with some meditative breathing exercises. Take breaks, listen, show empathy, create community. That is so important. Excellent. These are great. You all are experts here. Okay, nice. Next slide. Okay, so healing-centered learning environments, right? How do we do this? So some of the things that we can do are to be aware of signs or symptoms, right? Some of you, all of you were just listing some of these signs and symptoms. You want to co-create healing spaces initially. This is something that you can do to incorporate grounding or check-in routines in class on a fairly regular basis. Provide choice in content delivery and engagement, right? Choice can be really important when the students are having trauma issues because it gives them that agency. It makes them feel like they have control over the situation and you're meeting their needs that they have. So you want to also acknowledge the events, class content, and issues that may be triggering. Okay, and reframe from behaviors or reframe behaviors as communication, right? Sometimes students act out or all those things we talked about, they might act out, they might zone out. Okay, some of these things basically are, what we want to think about as not something negative necessarily, but communicating to us that there might be an issue here. Okay.
And Melissa, there was a question in the chat. What is grounding?
So grounding is sort of like a meditative or meditation technique where You bring your classes, your students in the classroom and yourself into your physical body by focusing on a physical aspect. It could be with your hands touching, it could be your feet on the ground, it could be your breathing, it could be something you're hearing in the space around you, or even something you look at. So grounding is a way to anchor yourself in the current moment so that you don't feel as anxious and have your mind racing too much about a trauma issue or something that might be producing that anxiety. Okay, that's what grounding is.
And then another question I'll tackle first and then let you add on is what is reframing behaviors as communication? And so in a moment, we'll talk about the trainings that our teachers, instructors have been working on. But one of their takeaways was recognizing that behaviors help convey something about the learner. And instead of jumping to an interpretation and, oh, they behaved in that way, they must be this or they must be doing such and such, instead seeing it as there's maybe something underlying that that behavior is communicating to us. And so rather than jumping to a conclusion, being open to seeing that as a different form of communication than just verbal communication. Melissa, would you add anything to that?
I'll just add that we have a couple scenarios that we're going to talk about in a little bit that we can use those as examples of a way to reframe behaviors. Okay. Okay, next slide. That's all you. Go
All
ahead,
right,
Xavier.
thank you. So now we want to share a little bit about the approach at EEC, or the English Empowerment Center. And again, we're a nonprofit community-based literacy organization. We do have about 19 staff, but we are able to do what we do with the help of more than 500 volunteers every year. Um, so our approach is multifaceted, and it involves these elements. For years, we've had a community resource guide that we call Snapshot. And in the past 2 or so years, we've added additional listings of service providers that focus on mental health or other perhaps related or wraparound services, and to help our English learners be able to use that community resource guide on their own, we wrote up a lesson plan that helps teachers guide their class through how to use this particular resource guide to search for and find information in it. Knowing, right, that some of our learners do come with limited or interrupted formal education, and that we shouldn't necessarily assume that how to find listings, how to read this sort of directory is understood or is common to all of our learners. Additionally, we were able to get some funding from the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health to pay for trainings for staff and for instructors so that we could build our knowledge more robustly through trainings and educational resources. And to that third point, we developed lesson plans on mental health, thinking specifically of our beginning level ESOL classes to help learners describe their emotions, talk about and navigate stress and coping strategies. And to complement that, as some in the chat have already posted, we worked with some of our partners to bring in community experts uh, who can speak to services available, who have that direct provider experience to talk with class about what's available for them or for their children through the school system or in the community. And of course, we'd be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that as ICE immigration enforcement activities have risen, we have, of course, recognized the need for our staff, instructors, and learners to be equipped with tools to stay informed, feel supported. And so we strive to have our approach be ever more trauma supportive, trauma sensitive, and related to ICE specifically, of course, offering guidance that's empowering while trying to not be alarming, and it's always rooted in dignity and care. Um, so focusing in on that first component, and then the question in the chat, we will share the lesson plan link again when we get to that section, but it's the same link that we posted at the beginning, and we will repost it. So the Snapshot Community Resource Guide is intended to equip our learners with valuable information about resources in our Northern Virginia area. Again, that's where we are based at the English Empowerment Center. Um, so we know that as an adult education provider, we're not just here to provide education. We know that to support adult learners, we have to have a holistic, whole learner kind of approach. And as a nonprofit, we don't necessarily have the capacity, have the resources to provide those services directly, but we can at least do our part through our community engagement efforts to be aware of what's out there to help distill that information to learners proactively and then as the questions come up. So I posted in the chat the link to our most recent version of Snapshot if you'd like to take a look as I briefly describe it. So these next few screenshots will show sort of the layout of typical pages in Snapshot. So it's kept very minimal, really trying to incorporate plain language principles. So it's, like I said, a directory where it lists different providers, different organizations with their main points of contact, their phone number, their email. So for things like housing, educational opportunities, childcare, healthcare, mental health services, and more, citizenship, immigration, legal services, and so on. Um, we have certainly heard that it would be nice to get more details, but we wanted the guide that we publish and that we got funding to print several thousand copies of to be as basic as possible, inviting the conversation with our staff to better understand and get more tailored or more specific recommendations. So again, it was our staff and volunteers, as well as some pro bono skills-based volunteer groups who year after year review this guide, check the links, look for additional links that we can add. And then certainly as emerging issues or more pressing issues come up, we try to add more sections. So now we want to talk briefly about the sort of training opportunities that we've been arranging for our staff and instructors. And one of them is mental health first aid. And I saw someone in the chat said that they are mental health first aid certified. We really found this to be a helpful way for us as staff to be able to respond in an emergency situation. Um, your local government may offer these trainings online or in person for free. Ours did, and so we were able to take advantage of that. But essentially, our experience doing the mental health first aid for adults, there's for youth and for adults, they are separate. It covers topics like recognizing common signs and symptoms of mental health challenges and strategies, information on when you're interacting with a person in crisis, how you might connect them to help. So the training itself is kind of hybrid. There's online self-paced modules and then a live facilitated session or multi-part session. Now, as for instructors, I pass this back to Melissa.
Thanks. For our trainings for our instructors, we do we've done a few things, and we have webinars that we regularly send out to our instructors, and that includes teachers, class aides, and tutors. So we find that places like Literacy Minnesota, the National Center on Families Learning, and others provide a regular offering of trauma-informed and trauma-supportive care and instruction. So those we curate and we send out on a weekly or so basis to our instructors during the semester. And then we also had many of our teachers, I believe it was 20 instructors and 3 staff, took a training through the Community Resilience Initiative. And this is an organization that put together this training, and it's about a 6-hour training for each course. So it's 12 hours altogether. And one is a trauma-informed training and one is trauma supportive. And so we had our many of our teachers, 20 teachers, take this training, and that was the last year when we did this program or worked on this issue. Okay. So my next question for everybody is, what is or what can foster resilience? We want to talk about, now that we've talked about trauma and some of the things that people experience when they have trauma, what can actually foster resilience that you've seen? And you can actually just put this in the chat. What are some resilience, having choice, right? Success, support systems, achieve, having built trust, praise, connections, community, encouragement, self-care. Excellent. Yes. Community is a big one coming up and support. Reviewing progress on goals, safety, and a sense of belonging, empowering individuals and your students in the classroom. Okay. Good consistency, sharing. Excellent. All of these things, right, can build resilience. And this is the good news, right? The good news is that people can and do heal from trauma and are able to come to the classroom and continue to learn and grow and achieve their goals. And Xavier, you can hit the next slide. The Community Resilience Initiative, that training that we took, 20 of our instructors and some staff took, they have 42 resilience building blocks, right? And these are just some of the ones that you all listed and that they have here. It's just a sampling of the 42 identified resilience building blocks. So this is really good news, and this is something where we want to focus our attention when we know we have students that have trauma issues. And in our classroom, we want to talk and build that resilience, talk about and build that resilience. Okay. So now let's talk about the scenarios that I mentioned earlier. Okay. Here's the first scenario. A student in class who has recently arrived to the USA regularly appears agitated and stressed. He routinely interrupts class to complain about trying to resettle in this country and the various obstacles and difficulties he is facing. The teacher regularly redirects the student, but over many weeks of class, he persists in interrupting the class. So let's put in the chat again, right? How might you handle this scenario? How would you approach this scenario? Let's hear in the chat some of the things you might do for this gentleman and in your class. Make a plan to address his needs, right? Put him in touch with people who can help, right? Give him suggestions, have a class discussion, point students to community resources, build belonging, find a wellness center, talk separately to him, meet individually, have a one-on-one, listen to him privately, give time and space. Great. And this is exactly what our teacher did. And in the conversations that we had with the teacher, she made space in the classroom for this gentleman at times when he was frustrated, and the class came together as a community and helped support him and listen to him and give him some suggestions and resources. In addition, she asked us for some resources, and we were able, using Snapshot and other resources, to give him those resources and help him connect to those in the community that would help and support him. She did take him to the side a few times, and I'm happy to report that at the end of the semester, by the end of the term, which is this is our intensive class, it's an 8-week session, 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. He was doing much better, and he re-enrolled and became, really engaged and really well adjusted to the class and the classroom setting, and did a good job with his experience and the experience in the classroom. Okay, great. Yep, those were great. Okay, here's another scenario. A student in a 4-hour-a-day in-person class becomes very agitated when the teacher asks her to change seats to pair up with a partner. The student has some history of yelling at her classmates and not wanting to follow teacher directions. The student resists moving from her seat, but the instructor insists she move to pair up. The student gets up and picks up her laptop to move, but when she gets to her new seat, she starts yelling and she throws her laptop onto the table. What might you do to handle this scenario? What are some things that you can do? Request a partner to move to her when pairing. Let her stay. Yes, let her stay in that seat that she wanted to. Let her work alone. Okay, let the student be. Yes, these are all great suggestions, and these are some of the things that we advised. Talk separately. Ask her to step outside and talk privately. Yep, our teacher did that as well. Pair up oops, it's going so fast, it's hard to keep up. Give them a moment. Certainly ask her to leave as this is disrespectful. Okay. talk with her separately. Okay, so what we did eventually to get her connected to a case manager, we were actually very lucky in this case. She already had a case manager, and we connected with her case manager to let her know that she was having some stress in class. And we asked this individual for assistance, and it turned out that she was diagnosed with trauma experiences and issues. And so we adjusted her placement in class and sent her to another class that was seemed better suited for her. And her case manager worked with her, and they put in a plan for her, and she worked the plan, and things worked out quite well in the end. Yeah, so good. Yeah, all of those, I think everybody mentioned all of those things I just said. Great. Okay, so this is the part when we talk about seeing behavior, as communication. The individual might be experiencing certain stressors and trauma experiences that seem to us, we might want to judge them and say that this is a negative thing, and not that it's not necessarily negative, but we want to take it as communication that maybe we can help this individual and support this individual. Okay.
And I'll just add, my background is in TESOL. I have a TESOL certificate, a master's in TESOL, but these sort of topics they didn't cover, right? And for us as language educators, the general advice, right, is have learners work in pairs, change the groupings pretty frequently so they get a lot of that practice talking with different partners, right? But this was a scenario that was very eye-opening for me and did give me pause to reconsider if we think about it from a UDL, Universal Design for Learning, or other kind of perspective, that even though there are those general principles, if you will, for teaching and learning languages, we still have to think about these other factors like trauma experiences, and how we know as educators, we always have to get to know our actual students and tailor our classroom, our classes according to who's with us in that semester, in that room. But Okay, so now we want to shift to talking about some of the lesson plans that we developed and have been using in our classes. Um, so we remind our instructors that our organization does not provide mental health services. We do not expect, nor do we ask instructors to provide mental health services. We're not trained professionals in that area, but we know of partners in our area who can offer those services. That said, for teachers, what is it that we can do in addition to the resilience building and the reframing of behaviors as communication and other strategies that Melissa has spoken about? So, before we share the lesson topics that we focused on, we'd love to hear from you in the chat. If you're thinking about addressing or touching on the subject of mental wellness, mental health, or trauma in your classes, what lesson topics would you address? So we're seeing culture shock, stress management, newcomer stress, how to ask for help, anxiety, self-care, relaxation techniques, family violence, domestic violence, stress management, PTSD, grounding, advocacy, unplugging from devices and the news, uh, talking about what you do in your free time. Yeah. Anxiety, social behavior, stress management. Yes. And for us in adult education and adult ESOL, there are, in fact, many instructional resources that are available. And they're in the handout that you can access through that EduShare link, and we'll post it again in a moment. Or if you're watching the recording of this, go to the COABE Adult Educator Resources site, and you can find it from full unit modules to separate lessons, all of which are open source or publicly available. We've curated those and put them in the handout. Um, but for us, this is how we approach the lesson development process. So before writing them, we did consult with some subject matter experts. So a former staff member, current board member, still works with an office of children in a local government. We also spoke with the associate director of a family and community engagement office in one of the local public school systems. So experts in family literacy and family engagement. Um, we did a resource analysis. So we looked at what are the lesson plans, what are the curricula that are already out there for adult ESOL, and from that tried to identify what's missing, either topically or in terms of level, what isn't something that we can already use at that beginning level class. Um, and then after we taught the lessons for the first time in spring of 2024, gathered that initial teacher feedback and had a meeting to get some thoughts on it. So to hear about the lesson plans, we want to pass it to our teacher who wrote these lesson plans for her to describe it in her own words. And before I play the video, I will go ahead and post the links that now that we're focusing on lesson plans, if you want to go and take a look yourself and start exploring, you can. But know that we will use some time, about 5 or so minutes coming up for you to look at the lesson plans and for us to discuss it. So that link there is in the chat, but it's the same one as before. So if you've already filled out that form and been redirected to the Google Drive folder, you're already there. You don't need to re-click this link. But okay, let's hear from our teacher and the lesson plan writer about these lesson plans.
Hi there, my name is Cassandra Kramer, and I'm a lead ESL instructor at the English Empowerment Center. I had the opportunity to create the 5 lessons related to mental health and wellness, and my colleagues had asked me to talk a little bit more about the content and the process that went into these lessons. So I'm going to talk about the first 4 lessons that I created. The first question really is, what is the task? The task was to take a complex topic like mental wellness and break it down so that it's accessible to beginner English language learners. How do we do that, right? So what I decided to do was start at the most basic level with vocabulary. So each lesson was structured in a similar way. It included an introduction that had visuals and questioning related to the topic, and we also framed the lesson goals with the objectives. And then in presentation and practice, I introduced the new vocabulary related to the topic, and I created a variety of scaffolded activities that allowed learners to practice the language. So I tried to use all different language skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And then as the activities progressed, I started at the basic word level, moving to the sentence level, and then to the discourse level with conversation. Within each lesson, I also included an evaluation, which gave the learners an opportunity to use the language that they had learned. Because many of our classes are multi-level and we wanted the lessons to be able to be accessed by beginner learners, it was really important to make all of the materials adaptable. So this is an example of a very simple activity where learners have to categorize their feelings into positive or negative. But within those same materials on page 2, I included another example where teachers would be able to go in and put in different words. They were working with level 2 students, level 3 students, or even literacy students. I also tried to make the activities as interactive as possible. And so this was just another example. This was a sentence maker with manipulatives where these squares would be cut up and students would have to move them around and build questions, build sentences. And they could even be working with other classmates. Students throughout the room might have those missing pieces, those missing words that they'd have to work together to be able to build the questions and answers. When it came to the packed activity, parent and child together time, I really didn't want to use an activity that would be put on a wall or something that would be made and then forgotten. I wanted something that parents could use every day with their children. So I decided to use this Today I Feel flipbook project, where parents worked with their children to compile, to decorate, and then they had this flip book that they could use to talk with their children about feelings. And the idea was that they could use it at the beginning of the day, check in with their children to see how they were feeling, but then also throughout the day as well. So after school, maybe that child's feelings have changed. And so it was an opportunity for discussion within the family. Some of our beginner learners even decided to put their native language next to the English words to help them remember this new vocabulary. Within the packed activity, I also wanted to include some reading opportunities for parents to read with their children. So this was one example. It was from Unite for Literacy, but the lesson plans included multiple different book options. When it came to stress and mental health, there's a part one and a part two. It was supposed to be one lesson, and then I realized as I was going through the materials that there was just so much. I could do an entire lesson on stress itself. So we decided to split it into two different lessons. The first one focusing on stress, what is stress? And the second lesson focusing on mental health and strategies. So I just want to give one more example. So talking about strategies, this would be within lesson two. Using sentence frames, even the most beginner learner would be able to use that new language that they have to be able to create strategies for themselves when it comes to mental health. Other considerations in terms of creating the lesson plans, I love incorporating digital literacy wherever possible. So I put suggestions within those lesson plans, even with using something as simple as a phone, no laptop necessary. Also incorporating STEM elements, I love to do that as well. The stress and mental health part one, they had a bar graph that they had to interpret, and then the activity pushed it one step further where the teacher and the students, they created their own bar graph about what stresses them out. In terms of making all of the materials adaptable, it was very important to include differentiation notes within the lesson plans, even suggestions for teachers. This is how we would use the questions for level one. These are the questions we would use for level two and level three. So it's helpful for teachers. And finally, virtual versus in-person. We have some virtual classes and we have some in-person classes. Some activities translate very well across the board, others do not. So I had to be very mindful with that in terms of activities and giving lots of different options depending on where the students were learning. So I have not talked at all about the last lesson, the final lesson snapshot, or about teacher feedback, but I'm going to allow my colleagues to do that. So with that, I'm going to toss it back to them.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for hearing from Cassie Kramer, Virginia Adult Education Teacher of the Year and Toyota Family Teacher of the Year runner-up last year. So let me first get the link to the directly to the Google Drive. I apologize that there were some issues with the links and things, but appreciate folks in the chat letting us know. So let me just make sure that link will work, and then we'll continue with our session today. But essentially, the next step is we would love for you all to have some time to look through one of the lesson plans. But again, we want to remind you what the lesson plan topics were before you get started. So again, they were multi-level, intended to be used in person or online on Zoom, and those topics were feelings with an add-on for family literacy for a packed parent and child together time activity around feelings, and then a two-part lesson series on stress and mental health, and then that fifth one that's around using our snapshot community resource guide. Other than the stress and mental health part one, part two, the rest can be standalone lessons. So it's not necessarily intended to be used in this particular order as shown on the slide. So for those of you who are not able to access the link, I'll just do a quick walkthrough so you can see it of what's in the materials. So the lesson plans are in Google Docs. List out the objectives, list the materials with links to each either Google Doc worksheet or the Google Slides for the slide deck or folders with more materials, and then with a slide deck for each lesson. Some of the materials do come from open resource libraries, like these vocabulary activities that come from Washington State and their project IDEA, which is absolutely worth checking out if you haven't already. Others we created, like this sentence completion activity, to further tailor the lesson. So we're going to pause the recording in just a moment to give you all a few minutes, 4 or so minutes to access those lessons. Take a look at one of them that might interest you. Look at the activities or the structure or the adaptations, and then we'll come back together and want to hear how do you think it might be useful for your program? How might you adapt it, or what might you add for your learners? Um, and then if you have questions in the next 3 or so minutes while we pause the recording, post them in the chat, and Melissa and I will try to respond to them before we resume the recording. So Bethel, can you pause the recording? Okay, so we've taken a moment to look at some of these lesson plans. Um, on the recording, you could look at some of the feedback from our instructors, but basically, they really felt like it helped open up more conversations with learners about stress and about health, and they and the students were eager to have more lessons around the topic, which we found was really encouraging and certainly spoke to how well those teachers helped set up a supportive learning environment before and during and through those lessons. Now, to complement those lesson plans, we got to think about community guest speakers. So, Melissa, take it away.
Okay, so we had some community guest speakers in our family literacy program, our family learning program, and we invited students and instructors to this Zoom call. We did a Zoom call, and Xavier, you can hit the next slide. Um, we partner for the family learning program. We partner with Alexandria City Public Schools, and the adults in the program are parents of the children in the schools, and they come to our classes to learn English in the context of helping their children also learn in their classes during the day when they're in school. And so what we did was we invited all of the students from our family learning program to this Zoom call and the teachers, and we had mental health specialists come in for this Zoom meeting to talk to the students, and we had bilingual translators. We had four of our main languages, and had them talk about the services that are provided by the school system to the parents and their children in the school system. And this was a really great experience for the school system and the parents to connect and learn about the resources within the community that relate to mental health and trauma. And the mental health providers that came from the school system were very knowledgeable and really supported the questions that came from the participants and the students. And there was a lot of great exchange and interest in the call, on the Zoom call, and it went really well. Okay.
Okay, so now we want to give some time for you all to reflect. We know we've shared a lot of background information, a lot of specific strategies that we've been implementing. And again, to remind that from a community resource guide to offering and promoting trainings to developing some lesson plans for our context, and then arranging for community guest speakers like the one that Melissa mentioned. Or sometimes our teachers have friends or family that are health professionals, and they invite those folks to their individual classes. Um, so either if you want to give feedback on those lessons and what you might tweak or how you might use them, or just more generally, if you'd like to share what's one action step that you will take after this webinar to make your program or your class or services more healing centered or more trauma sensitive. Um, Feel free to write that down privately or post it in the chat. We'd love to hear. So some things coming through in the chat. Uh, would like to try those lesson plans that we shared. Allow students to choose whether to talk or to write. Some higher level adaptation activities like writing paragraphs. Oh boy, Melissa, a lot are coming in. If you have some highlights that you want to call out, feel free. Um, let's see, create a short Wellness Wednesday lesson plan, breathing exercises.
Mindfulness before beginning class, building community, reframe emotion as communication. Great.
Have the feelings lesson be used in a kind of mommy and me format so that it can be used in a more two-gen or intergenerational capacity with the whole family. Great. We see someone calling out that earlier statement of, we live in a world filled with trauma and its symptoms are often invisible or misunderstood. Yeah.
Breathing exercises. Yep. Compiling community resources like the snapshot. Great. Categorizing emotions. Mindfulness Mondays.
Wonderful. So keep sharing what your takeaways are. I'm going to post in the chat my email for those of you who were watching this and the links weren't working. Feel free to email me to get access to those lesson plans, or if you just want to talk more about this topic or have additional questions that we don't have time for in these last few minutes. Um, so my email there is in the chat if you'd like to reach me. Um, but any last questions before we pass it back to Coabe to wrap up this webinar? Okay, a question, Melissa, or for me. Have you come across populations that are unwilling to talk about their feelings or mental health? I know it's a rough subject in some cultures.
Yes, there are definitely some individuals who are not in the space at the time for whatever reason. They may not want to broach the subject or talk about their feelings or an event or the trauma that they've experienced, and we never push it. It's always about choice. So that's an important question to ask. Thank you for asking that question because it is something that does happen for different individuals for different reasons. And when it comes up, we don't push individuals. We try to bring things to the classroom that everybody can participate in, like mindfulness and check-ins in building community, things that are positive and useful for all students. And rather than pushing a topic or an issue on an individual that does not have the space or is not prepared to do it.
And then Melissa, I think let's take one final question. Do you think your suggestions will work with adult ESL students in a remote setting, given the current climate of immigration issues?
That's a good question. I do think some of this could work in a virtual setting. Um, Certainly building community and talking about feelings and checking in and breathing activities, taking breaks, having routines in the classroom, consistency, offering choice to students, all of these things can also be employed in a virtual setting. So I think that's something that depending on the thing that you want to employ, it can in many cases fit in a virtual setting as well.
Yeah, and I think to the other question about times where it might be beneficial to not discuss feelings or emotions, yeah, especially when we go over things like know your rights information, we really try to emphasize for instructors, right, that it's not requiring, it's not directly asking students to share anything in particular, but with things like that to provide information, let learners know that if there are questions, speak with me, speak with the staff at the English Empowerment Center. But to make clear when responses are definitely not required, right? To help learners understand what we're expecting and what also we're not expecting. So, okay, Bethel, we're going to pass it back to you to help close out this webinar. And Melissa and I just want to say thank you so much to COABE for this invitation. Thank you as well to COABE sponsors. We're so grateful that there was time spent on this topic, and we hope you all will keep in touch.
Thank you so much, Xavier and Melissa. If you could take the poll before you exit, that would be great. Also, the certificates for attending the webinar will be emailed to you about 24 hours from now. And the recording will be posted on our website as well as the resources. So thank you everyone for attending and have a great rest of your week.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, take care.